Well, good afternoon, everyone. Let's give a warm welcome to all who made this event meaningful. And I'd like to start with Connecticut CCIM President Michael Guidicelli. Michael, where are you? Don't be shy. Okay, next time you can stand up, Michael. All right. And also, Sept, you all are amazing. We're going to have Bob up here real soon. As everyone knows, Sept makes a huge difference in the state of Connecticut, and we're so thankful for you also being a sponsor of this event. And we also want to honor our annual sponsors. And if any annual sponsor for the Connecticut CCIM chapter is here, would you please stand? Okay. So, thank you. Thank you, guys. Thank you. The annual sponsors' involvement and support of the Connecticut CCIM chapter provides all of our chapter with a valuable source of financial underwriting. This support enables us to continue our commitment to education and enrichment of professionalism in commercial real estate, and we appreciate Sept as our partner in doing this, so thank you all very much. It is my privilege to introduce Dave Cooley, making a Meriden Business Center, who helped this event come together. Thank you so much for doing that. It was a lot of work. Let's give an applause for Dave. Thank you.
Thank you all for coming, and welcome to Meriden, the Silver City. I grew up here and having fun with Lisa Bizak, who really did a lot of the work to pull this together. There's Lisa. And thank you, Lisa, for everything. You know, this is a great story we have in Meriden, so we wanted to make sure that we brought you folks here to check it out. We are right in the middle of an opportunity zone. We have 3 in Meriden that we're looking to hear and learning today ourselves what that all means in the end, but we've got a great mix of old and new architecture. We've got flooding control in place with a beautiful new green. We've got the new trains running back and forth, $5 each way, New Haven, Hartford, round up into Springfield. And so our job, our role is to just bring back downtown as a sense of place, whether it's arts, whether it's music, community, economic development, of course, and look forward to helping any of you guys as you're out there in your travels, help connect here in Meriden to property owners, business owners, funding sources, whatever the case might be. We're here to kind of be that glue. So thank you all for coming. And thank you, Shirley. Shirley and I had the privilege of playing in the CCIM Wayne D'Amico, a Meriden native, Memorial Golf Tournament last week, and she hit a huge 20-foot putt on the 16th hole. That was amazing. So thank you, Shirley, for everything, and enjoy the evening. And I'm here to help also with technology and photography and everything else, so if you need anything, I'm here.
Thanks a lot, Dave. Thank you, Dave. I can tell you he also can knock them out there, those, about 200 yards? Okay, Bob Santee will give us an event overview, but before doing so, let's get acquainted with Bob if you don't know him already. He is the CEO and the president of the Connecticut Economic Resource. It's called Sept. And for 25 years, Sept has worked with the state of Connecticut and our regulated utilities to answer business questions, provide research, and to help them grow in Connecticut. Bob has always enjoyed working in the intersection of public and private sector issues, often translating different viewpoints on critical policy issues. His public sector leadership roles include stops with the Reagan administration and Senator and then Governor Lowell Weicker. In addition to Sept in the private sector, Bob has worked for the Regional Growth Partnership in New Haven, the Metro Hartford Alliance in Hartford, and the Deloitte and Touche, how do you pronounce that last? Touche.
It doesn't exist anymore, it doesn't matter.
Okay, Washington Service Center. And some recent news, 7 weeks ago, Bob became a grandfather for the first time. Congratulations, and come on up, Bob.
Well, that was the most important piece of business all night, right? My wife's out with them in Denver right now, actually. Really, one of the things we're going to do tonight is try and translate some public sector policy into private sector language so investors and communities know how they can get together and do something. So that is kind of the work that I've done a lot of my career. Just a little bit more about CERC for those of you who don't know us. We are a public-private partnership, and that partnership is between the state and really in the Department of Economic and Community Development and the state's regulated utilities. And our regulated utilities have invested tens of millions of dollars in economic development in this state through their support for CERC. And yes, we like to help business find a reason to be in Connecticut. And I listen in some trepidation when we say we assist business, because what's happened in the last 25 years, have we really grown business? Just think what it would be like if we weren't out there doing this work. That's the important thing. Right now, we're doing a couple of things in partnership with the state. We talk about what we do as working globally and locally. We actually have been doing business recruitment overseas in Israel and in Brazil and in Germany. And, if you're going to have companies coming to Connecticut to invest, then the towns better be ready to receive them. And those of you who work with towns regularly sometimes recognize that sometimes they're not quite as ready as we'd like them to. So actually what we're hoping to do with regard to the new opportunity zone opportunity, and you're going to hear us trip over the word opportunity all night long because there's no other word for it really. What we'd like to do is help towns understand what they need to do with investment opportunities to make them attractive to the investment community. So we're going to try and play a matchmaker role on a statewide basis. So, you're never going to find a lack of experts who are willing to come and talk about something that we really don't know that much about. And I only say that because the regulations aren't out yet. We were laughing a little bit last week because they are supposed to be out any day now. And what I've heard is that IRS has now sent them to the Office of Policy and Management for their review, so who knows how long that review will take. But we do hope that there will be regulations out. I will tell you also that this was drafted, the legislation was drafted so that there wouldn't be a lot of public interference in the private investment opportunities that are created by this law. So there are investors out there, you're in the room, you've been looking at this opportunity and feel that there's enough going on that you can start thinking about what the structure of a fund would look like. And that's one of the things we want to talk to you about tonight. So we're trying to work both the public and the private angle here and hopefully come up with something that won't be quite like the shovel-ready program that President Obama had. We want to really have some projects that are shovel-ready and are out there for investors. So that's all I'm really going to do tonight except to introduce the speakers and maybe go through questions with those of you who have questions at the end. And we are going to change the order, by the way, just a discussion with the speakers. Liddy Carter will go first. John Staffstrom is going to go second, and Brian Newman is going to go third. So I'll introduce them in that order, and I'm going to come up and introduce them as they get ready to speak. And Liddy is our first speaker. Liddy is the managing director at Enhanced Capital and has a long history of activities in the venture community in Connecticut. She worked at a business accelerator at the Connecticut Technology Council before that, managed a clean tech venture fund, founded the Angel Investor Forum network in Connecticut. And in operating companies, she was CEO of Resource Recovery Systems and CFO of NetKey, in addition to her financing responsibilities. She's been on the board of the Angel Capital Association and was a director of the Connecticut Venture Group for a time. She also was a mentor at the Yale Entrepreneurial Center. And she has her MBA from Yale and her BA from Columbia University. Liddy Carter.
Thank you, Bob. And thank you guys for all being here. I am very excited to share anything I know about opportunity zones with you tonight, because this is a rare, rare opportunity. Get it powered up? Great. I was going to use the buttons, but this is a disclaimer, not very interesting. This is a rare opportunity because it is a blue ocean. It is a new program. It's never been done before. It's a creative program. Comes out of a lot of very experienced investors and entrepreneurs, mostly from Silicon Valley, saying, you know, what we're doing just isn't working. All these programs coming out of Washington, D.C., trying their best, but really structured in such a way that we're leaving a lot of people behind. So where's the biggest pool of capital that we could use to make a difference? And they realized that the stock market is presenting the biggest pool of capital, 6.7 trillion potentially of capital gains. Half of that's the stock market, half of it's the real estate market. Any way you look at it, it's a lot of money. And what they've done is they've created a program where we as individuals, and I mean individuals, can set up a fund, can go out, can invest in a low-income community, one of the 25% of all low-income communities that have been designated already, and invest. You can invest in a business, you can invest in a company, you can invest in infrastructure. It's really up to you. You need a good lawyer, that's why John's here. You need a good accountant, that's why Brian's here. But other than that, you can do it yourself. And that's what's so exciting. There's nobody in Washington telling us there's only so much money allocated and you have to be such and such qualified. It doesn't exist. So every town can set up its own fund, or they can look to people like us to work with them with funds. And I mean, I can't tell you, my firm has been in tax credit-driven finance for 20 years. That's what we do. We know every tax credit program that's out there, guaranteed. Nothing like this exists. So that's why I'm so excited about it. So that's kind of the big picture, and now we're going to drill down. So when I talk about investing, there are lots of ways to do that, and all of you who've done projects, I know a lot of you are from real estate, and we all think debt, but this is an equity play, okay? But the good news is that is not defined, and it's not really going to be significantly more defined than that. It's going to be equity, but it can be preferred equity, as we understand it today. It can look a lot like debt, or it can be pure equity. Really, right now, there aren't many restrictions on that. There's another big picture item. This is a 10-year hold period. There are benefits from just investing in the fund day one. That benefit, is that you get to defer capital gains. If you have capital gains today, you can invest them in a fund, and you can defer that capital gains tax payment from day one. If you hold it for 5 years, you get a little bump up in your basis. You hold it for 7 years, you get a little more of a bump up. And then you have to pay that original capital gains, and then you hold it for another couple of years, and any money you make on the investment from day one, you don't pay any capital gains on if you've held it for 10 years. That's a really good thing. If you compare that to a 1031 exchange, where you're just kind of deferring and you're deferring and you're deferring, you never get out. This is an opportunity to literally roll your gains and eventually get out. You will not have to pay those taxes. That's unusual. I've had so many real estate investors tell me they don't need this because they got 1031 down, no problem. They're just going to pass it on to their kids, get that step up in basis, never have to worry about it. That may be true, but at some point it's nice to get out of that deferral. Same with businesses. There's this 1202 thing, you invest in small businesses, you never have to pay capital gains. This is different. You literally can invest in a small business, it can grow as much as it wants. This could be the next Facebook, and you can get out of those capital gains. Equity and infrastructure, clearly a different kind of risk profile, but it's definitely an opportunity here where people who are looking for stable returns might want to invest in an infrastructure project. We're looking at one in Bridgeport that's really interesting. The returns are strong, and the returns are relatively reliable thanks to the utilities. Those are the kind of things, those three buckets, real estate, businesses, and not just small businesses, mind you. You put a big business in one of these zones, you can still invest in that stock if you can own the majority of it, and then infrastructure. So those are three pretty exciting categories. You guys, by the way, if you have any questions, just stop me. Ask. Yeah, sure.
Hello. There you go. So if you invest in a company that then takes off like Facebook or something like that, how long do you? At what point do you have to then start paying on? Like, is it forever? Whatever money you make on that investment is.
Could you hold it forever and ever?
And it
I don't know.
More and more valuable, and you still don't pay any taxes on it?
We think that you will be able to hold it until you exit from the Opportunity Zone Fund, and we don't think that there's necessarily a 10-year horizon on that, but we know you have to hold it at least 10 years. So, and I'll get into some of the restrictions, and in fact, I'm really going to let John and Brian burst your bubble. I'm going to tell you how wonderful it is, and they're going to tell you all the limits. So that's the fun way to go. So I can just see them up here cringing because, they're saying, she's so wrong. It could be much worse than that. So, look, these things are supposed to be dead easy to set up, too. I have literally heard someone who's an IRS official say, we think it's going to be a one-page form. Now, I've done a lot of IRS forms. There are no one-page forms, so we know that that's an exaggeration. But we think it's not going to be that hard. And we think they say you can self-designate. In fact, there's a draft of all this out there. So we think you can just say, look, I want to be a fund. And you can file it. Anybody in this room can do this. That's very exciting. And a fund, we all think of a fund traditionally as a lot of people getting together, pooling their money, and investing in a lot of things to take advantage of diversification. That's what a fund is all about. That's not how this is. This might be that way, but it also might be, and right now it really, because of the limited regulatory guidance that we have, right now it really is, you can have one investor investing in one thing, and that's all it is. So no diversification. Now, we are hoping that the regulations come out and it makes it more clear how multiple people will be investing in multiple things. There are timing issues that are just not clear. But, think about that. If you are looking at buying the building across the street and you buy it yourself, you could set up as an Opportunity Zone Fund and take advantage of all this. That's all there is to it, as far as we know. Now, if you have a fund, you have to invest 90% of that fund in an opportunity zone. So that's good, but that also means that 10% of that fund can be invested elsewhere. So that's kind of exciting. because you can make a lot of money investing anywhere, and if you have a big enough fund, that can make a big difference. So I'm showing you this slide because there are plenty of maps around the room that show you exactly where in Meriden you can invest and be in an opportunity zone. There's so many maps on the internet. I like the one that's from the CDFI, and I'll give you that link later. But this one I also like. This is from a tax company called, or accounting company, no offense, Brian, but this is the Novogradic one, I think. And what's good about it is it shows you not only this dark green area, that's a piece of the Meriden Opportunity Zone Fund. You can see how it's got little lines and streets and stuff. It's very granular, it's very detailed. But what you should also know is that around opportunity zones, there are eligible opportunity zones. Those were the areas that were eligible according to the code, but weren't selected. There's a chance that a lot of properties in these opportunity zones will cross the edges of those barriers, and it's one of the areas that we're waiting to find out how that's handled. There's also the next category down, which is public housing developments. There are some ancillary benefits of investing in those. There's community renewal grants, there are empowerment zones, there's enterprise community zones, there's promise zones, and other things. My point is, there are no limits on double dipping here. Sounds like I'm talking about something nefarious. I'm not. I'm encouraging you to, whenever you think about these projects, think about all the various tax benefits and support from all the agencies that you might be able to get. There could be quite a lot. Okay. The other weird thing that happens in our worlds is we all live in one place. We live in Connecticut. We think about Connecticut. We think about Meriden. We think about where we are. This is a nationwide program. All 50 states have this. All 50 states are competing for the dollars that are going into these. And to the extent that you are real estate developers and not necessarily tied to one place, it's important for you to understand that, because this money is large, as I've said. There's a lot of it, but it's also going to be very competitive, at least initially, for the best projects that are ready to go and offer the highest returns, because the tax benefits are the same everywhere. Some states are adding extra benefits. Connecticut right now is not, but some of the new gubernatorial candidates are talking about thinking how they can support this program, which is great. And so, you know, I think you have to keep an eye on the competition, I guess is the point. Okay, so I'm going to repeat myself in case you didn't get it the first time, because we're going to go in a little more detail. We're almost at the fine print. There are 3 big categories here. Real estate. Look, you guys are a real estate crowd. I understand that, so we're starting there. But also, you know what? That's going to be the biggest pool of investments that are used for this money. First, it's the biggest dollar amount of potential assets. But when you think about real estate, you're not going to go buy a brand new building. You've got to buy a building that basically is either you've got to invest and start and build it from scratch, or you've got to rehab it. It can be commercial or residential, and when you think about rehabbing it, I'm just reiterating that you want to add that historic rehab or low-income housing tax credits to this, even new market tax credits, all these things that'll help you make that project fly. When you think about a business, oh, and by the way, when you buy that real estate, whoever you buy it from, they've got to be taken out, pretty much. Businesses, it's the same thing. You've got to buy a business that's kind of for sale. You can't be sort of buying in a 10% stake into a business. That's just not the way this is going to work. Honestly, I don't think it's the best public policy, but that's not the way it's set up. So you can either start a new business, you can expand a business that's already in a zone, or you can expand, you can have a business that's growing somewhere else and move it into an opportunity zone. All 3 of those work. And that's what's so exciting. And since you have to own a majority of it, 80%, you're going to want to have, well, you don't have to own 80%. The seller has to own less than 20% after it's over, as I understand it. Maybe Brian will clarify that. But So it has to be a business that can be purchased. Like my example of Facebook might be difficult for most of us. So think about smaller probably, but definitely not just small, not just startups. On infrastructure projects, what we're looking at is a lot of renewable energy and energy efficiency projects. Now, these have to be set up around companies, so in a sense, it's also like investing in a small business, but we think that's a huge opportunity for towns to really get behind infrastructure projects. Okay, so now we're going into the fine print. And this is where I'm going to zip through a little bit because I know that John's going to talk more about this. But, you know, the key thing when you think about these and setting these things up is that you've got to target the big picture. Find a building that needs some rehab, that's in an opportunity zone, and then look closely at the regulations and hire outside counsel. These, while it's simple, it's important that you don't, you know, mess up in any of these things. One of the key things is that the property has to be substantially used in an opportunity zone. And you can either, this can be new property, as I said, or it can be property that's being improved. If you're going to improve it, you have 30 months to do it. So I'll tell you an example of an investment that I just heard about. Because the deal is you have to use, you have to spend as much money improving or rehabbing the property as you did on purchasing the property. So there are all these regulations about not doing sweet deals. Like someone was saying to me, well, if I bought the property from my brother-in-law and I only spent $1, then I don't have to spend another $1, and then that would be okay. And of course, there are all these self-dealing things. You really can't do stuff like that. So this is an important thing, and I think it's important for all of us. This is a huge opportunity for us to change the face of our communities, and you can't be gaming it like that. There aren't a lot of regs today, but there are going to be more. So if you do a business, it's kind of the same thing. You can do a new business or an existing business, but there are some limits. Like basically, the tangible assets have to be in an opportunity zone or used in an opportunity zone. You have to earn about half of your money in an opportunity zone. What the definition of earning is still to be determined. So for instance, we're looking at a bakery that's in an opportunity zone, and they sell the bread that they bake outside of the opportunity zone. And we aren't sure that that means they earn it in the opportunity zone, even though they bake the bread there. That's one of the clarifications we've asked for from the IRS right now. And essentially, this can't be like a bank. It can't have, this is not a financial property company. They're asking, you know, basically don't do that. And it can't be a sin business. Now, I realize there are golfers in the room and you don't really want to think of that as a sin business, but according to the IRS, that's included. Golf clubs, massage parlors, stuff like that. You know, that's just not going to work. So investor focus, we're really looking for investors that have capital gains. We'll be partnering with high net worth individuals and some corporations that have capital gains. Some of those people will be impact-oriented investors and will take below market rates of return. However, having been in the tax credit business a long time, I can tell you that that number of people is a tiny number compared to the number of people who are looking to maximize their returns. So when you think about putting projects together, don't think that people will put money in just because it's a good thing to do. No. We're looking for absolute maximum return as much as we can, given the level of risk. And a lot of investors think these zones present a slightly higher level of risk than some other zones. So I really encourage you all to when you put projects together and when you bring them to us, put your best foot forward, because it's going to go a lot easier. Some people will be able, especially larger investors, institutional investors, will be able to match their investments with tax credits of other sorts, and that will make the whole project easier to do as well. So here are the key resources that I recommend you think about. I gave you 3 because, frankly, these are all you need. The IRS, the EIG.org. These are the guys who kind of spearheaded this legislation. It's the Economic Investment Group. And it's just a very clear website. And then cdfifund.gov as well is a great place to go for a lot of details and a lot of good maps. The most important thing is to remember who I am and, and how to reach me. There's my email. If you have projects, bring them to us. We will point you in the right direction, or we'll help you invest in it. One of the great things, as I said, and I want to leave you with this is not a zero-sum game. The more money we all put into communities like downtown Meriden, the better off these communities will be and the better our investments will do. This is the more the merrier, the ultimate more the merrier deal. So anything we can do to help, we will. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Liddy. And after my nasty comments in the introductory part of this, I must say we have a really great panel here tonight. They're the best people on this issue that we have in the state. So you're lucky to have them here. And the next one up is John Staffstrom. John is an attorney with Pullman and Comley working out of their Bridgeport office and is chair of the public finance department at the firm. You can imagine what his practice is. He's bond counsel, letter of credit counsel, underwriters counsel in large government bond transactions, and has represented borrowers in significant government finance transactions. Also involved in debt and loans and modification, settlement, and restructuring of loan obligations. I think it's important also, talking about CDFA, you work with the Council of Development Finance Agencies, has served on the Bridgeport City Council, and has served many chairs and many different responsibilities at the Bridgeport Business Regional Council. So not only do we thank you for your law practice, but for everything you do for the community as well. So here's John Staffstrom.
Well, I'm happy to be here with all of you. I'm especially happy to be here with Liddy Carter, because Liddy and I actually go back a long way. We were, I don't think you mentioned that part of her resume, she was at Morgan Stanley as a young analyst, and more than an analyst, I was a senior associate at Pullman and Comley, and we both worked on taking People's United Bank public when it went public the first time. Although we had to do it twice because we were in the market in the middle of the 1987 recession and had to pull the offering and do it again. So I'm happy to be here with Liddy. Just a brief commercial. As you said, I'm the chair of our public finance group at Pullman and Comley. For those of you who don't know us, we're about 100 lawyers, half of us in Bridgeport and half of us in Hartford. I head our public finance group, which not only represents public entities in doing their financing, but we do a lot of public-private partnerships. And it's one of the reasons that we're excited about this opportunity. When we represent developers, particularly in communities like Meriden, like Bridgeport, like Hartford, what we find is that in order to get a project done, there is a significant capital stack of various things that have to happen. Perhaps there's grant money from the state, perhaps there's some federal money, perhaps there's new market tax credits, there's historic tax credits, state and federal, and sometimes it comes down to where do you find your conventional financing and your equity. And as Liddy pointed out, we think this is a real opportunity to bring equity into communities like this as part of a complicated capital stack. Liddy and I have done this once before, and I thought she was going to actually give you some of the basic background, so I'm going to go back and do a little bit of that. For those of you who aren't totally familiar with this, this is a program that was adopted by Congress at the end of last year, authorizing the designation of 25% of enterprise zones within every state to be opportunity zones. That process has been completed throughout the country, and as Liddy pointed out, Meriden has 3 of those opportunity zones. There are many others around the state to do that. Everybody's alluded to the fact that we're sort of talking about what we think is going to happen, because the statute that creates opportunity zones is not very complicated compared to lots of other statutes, but we are waiting for IRS regulation on how the program is actually going to work. which was promised in July and promised in August and is now promised for before the end of this month. We actually think that may really happen. So the program is in place. What I'm going to do is talk about a few of the legal considerations. And I wasn't as organized as our other two panelists either, so you have a handout from me instead of slides. But at least you get to take something away from me instead of having to print it out yourselves. As Liddy says, one of the reasons we think this is an exciting program is that the creation and the operation of the qualified opportunity funds is probably going to be fairly simple compared to what we would normally have to do in this context. You're going to have to the best knowledge, you'll have to self-certify the creation of the fund to the IRS on a form to be released by the IRS. A corporation or a partnership, presumably a limited liability company, will qualify to form that fund. Minimum of 90% of the assets of the fund need to be invested in eligible investments in an opportunity zone or opportunity zones. I think Liddy hit upon one of the most exciting parts of this, and we've already had discussions with our developer clients. This doesn't have to be the traditional fund that raises $500 million. This could be a fund that's created for $5 million for an individual project. So there were clearly developers talking about just funding projects on a one-off. And if in fact the funds are as easy to create as has been promised, it will be a tool that will be widely available. The interest in the Opportunity Zone property must be required from an unrelated party after December 31st, 2017. Liddy talked about the unrelated party concept. We haven't seen the guidance on that, but we should fully expect that people aren't going to be able to buy things from their spouse or their cousins and that type of thing. There's no instructions yet or guidance given on to any disclosures that might be related to the fund. Anytime we have somebody raising money into a fund, the question is what the disclosure is going to have to be to the investors. We expect that that's not going to be, we expect that the IRS is going to view this as being sophisticated investors, and again, the idea is to allow people to create funds. So we'll wait and see what the guidance is on that. The second part of what I wanted to talk about is the investor due diligence regarding qualified opportunity funds and what an investor has to look like if they're going to either create a fund or invest in a fund. Obviously, you need to first confirm that the investments by the fund are made in an opportunity zone or opportunity zones. You need to confirm that the assets are the type that are eligible for investment under the the Opportunity Zone program. Stock in a domestic corporation, capital or profits interest in a domestic partnership. As Liddy pointed out, tangible property used in a trade or business that substantially improves the property. That could include real estate or machinery, and then acquired by the unrelated party after the end of last year. You're going to want to confirm that the assets will be held by the fund for the period necessary to access the tax benefits and the capital gains deferral. Liddy talked about the 5 years, the 7 years, and the 10 years. And obviously, if you're soliciting folks to invest in a fund, or if you're investing in a fund yourself, you need to do the thing that sometimes people overlook. You got to confirm that there's going to be the normal expected increases of value in the property, lest there be no capital gains benefit. And Liddy talked about a little bit about structuring your investment, especially for outside investors who are coming into a more distressed community, to make sure that there's the right story that you tell, to attract the investors. What constitutes qualified opportunity zone property? Opportunity zone stock, which is an equity interest in a business corporation. It's not a not-for-profit corporation, because obviously what we're looking for here is the capital gains deferral. Opportunity zone partnership interest, partnership or a limited liability company taxed as a partnership, probably not limited liability companies that are disregarded for tax purposes. Qualified opportunity zone property includes assets of a qualified opportunity zone business. I'll talk a little bit more about that. And it does not appear that the Opportunity Fund could make a loan to a qualified opportunity zone business. It really needs to be an interest in the business. Opportunity zone partnership interest in any capital or partnership interest in a domestic partnership, focus on domestic, acquired by the Opportunity Fund after 12/31/17 solely in exchange for cash. The partnership must be or organized as a qualified opportunity zone business, and it must continue to qualify for substantially all of the time that the Opportunity Fund's holding period holds the partnership interest. Substantially all is something that we're looking forward to see what is included in the IRS guidance. Similarly, with Opportunity Zone stock, it's got to be acquired solely in exchange for cash after 12/31/17. Company must be organized as similar to the partnerships, and we have the same qualification requirement. The other place folks can invest is the Qualified Opportunity Zone business, which we think there's going to be a lot of opportunity to do that. It's different than just investing in the stock and investing in the partnership interest, and the same basic rules apply. What constitutes qualified opportunity zone business, and Liddy alluded to most of this, means a trader business in which substantially all of the tangible property owned or leased by the taxpayer is qualified opportunity zone business property, meets the following requirements. Again, I'm reiterating what Liddy said, at least 50% of its gross income is derived from the active conduct of trader business in the opportunity zone. We'll have to see what that means on companies that are working in the opportunity zone but exporting their products or their goods outside of the zone. A substantial portion of its intangible property is used in the active conduct of such trader business in the zone. And as Liddy said, I don't call them sin businesses. I don't consider golfing to be a sin business. Maybe massage parlors not I don't know. But anyway, but you can't invest in those type of businesses. And the last thing is there are obviously penalties. So people are going to have to pay attention. I know that our next speaker is going to talk about what you need to do to pay attention to this and get the real benefits of this. But if the Opportunity Fund fails to meet the requirement that 90% of its assets are invested in qualified opportunity zone property, then there's a monthly penalty, and a series of penalties kick in, as you might expect. We clearly don't know what the IRS enforcement on this program is going to be, but I imagine it's going to be similar to other IRS enforcement programs, and you're not going to want them knocking at your door. So what you are going to want to do is you are going to want to find the right lawyer and the right accountant to make sure that you structure this investment up front and proceed with that. And I just end by saying that we at our firm, who do a lot of business, as I say, in a lot of capital stack, and also in a lot of what some people consider distressed municipalities, I'll call them up and coming communities, really view this, as Liddy has already stated, as a tremendous opportunity to put particularly equity money into these type of communities. Thank you.
Thank you, John. You heard from the attorney, now we're going to hear from the CPA. Brian Newman is a tax partner at Cohn Resnick in the Hartford office. 30 years experience with the firm or generally in the profession, is it? Yeah, more than 30, he's admitting to her. It says 30 in the bio, but. And extensive experience dealing with tax issues on businesses from family-owned companies to Fortune 500. So an extremely broad distribution in technology, manufacturing, and a lot of industries. Brian also, in addition to speaking on these issues on behalf of the firm, is very involved in his community as well, not just from the Connecticut Society of CPAs, which we would expect, but their trust fund as well, and looks after investments that the profession is making in communities across Connecticut. And he's also served as president and chairman of the Andrew and Joyce Mandel Jewish Community Center, and is very involved in the Jewish Community Foundation as well. Happy to have you here, Brian. Thanks.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for coming tonight. Just a quick word about me. I'm just finished my 34th busy season. In accounting years, that's probably 100 years old. And what I do basically is I have a wide range of clients, anywhere from real estate, healthcare, manufacturing. So I kind of run the gamut. I started my career at a national firm for 12 years and grew up really being a jack of all trades, but now have really focused in the area of real estate and flow-through entities, and was also an adjunct professor at the University of Hartford for the past 16 years until they wanted me to teach online, and I decided that you can't teach an old dog new tricks, and I really wanted to be, in the classroom, making a difference face-to-face with the students as opposed to online. And unfortunately, all their master's in tax classes did go online because that's what was, the students were demanding. So Cohn Resnick is a firm of about 2,600 professionals. We have 26 offices throughout the United States. We also have an office in Chennai, India. Okay. There you go. Okay. And there's about 275 partners, 2,600 employees. And I'm responsible for the tax practice in New England. So with that, a lot of what's in my presentation kind of has already been said, and the reason why we had me go last was because we decided that even though a lot of the information was already covered in my presentation, I also have some thought questions that we should talk about and we should kind of throw out there as, things that we don't know right now, but we're hoping, again, to get guidance within the next couple days, and hopefully some of those questions will be answered. So with that, again, our disclaimer, what I wanted to cover today, and like I said, a lot of it has been covered. Again, kind of three aspects to this. You get to defer the gain on an initial capital gain. You could have a portion of that gain forgiven, and then the real benefit is after 10 years where you make an election to step up your basis, which initially is zero, up to fair market value at the end of the 10-year period. For anyone who wants the IRS information, notice 2018-48 was the notice that identified all the opportunity zones, and again, a link to where you can go to see which locations are in fact opportunity zones. It was created by the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017, and really it was a way to, again, like Libby said, take all the gains that are inherent in either the stock market or partnership interest and stuff like that, and put it to work in different projects. So what I did in my presentation was kind of went through 8 steps you have to go through in order to really take full advantage of opportunity zones. And first is, again, the taxpayer recognizes the capital gain. It could be from stock, it could be from real estate partnership interests. The person who recognizes the gain has to reinvest the gain within 180 days. Okay? Now that's different. You may say, well, that sounds familiar, right? Because 1031 exchanges, there's 2 pieces to that. One is when you sell now only real estate, you could do a like-kind exchange with. You have 45 days to identify the property, and then concurrently you have 180 days to close on the property. But there's a big difference between the opportunity zones and a like-kind exchange. With a like-kind exchange, you have to exchange both the full value of what you sold. You have to either stay the same or trade up in both fair market value and equity in order to have a completely deferred exchange. With an opportunity zone, you're just reinvesting the gain portion of it. So that's a big difference. Again, we talked about the organization as either a corporation. Yes. Yes. Yeah, so you have to have a fund, okay? So it can't be Brian Newman just invests in the opportunities, the building across the street. You have to have the structure in place that we're talking about. Okay. Now, the funds must be organized as a corporation or a partnership. John said in his presentation he thinks LLCs that are taxed as partnerships will meet that criteria. I hate to, I'll throw this out there, John. There's been some commentators that said that, what's that? Oh, you said? No, right, that's, so there are some commentators that have said you have to have a limited partnership. Well, I guess we'll see when the regs come out. So that's, yeah, so, okay, so we'll see. Again, opportunity zone, invest in opportunity zone property, and the 90% test applies. Again, the 5 years and the 10 years, the 5 years and the 7 years. So for 5 years, you get a basis bump of 10%, and 7 years, you get a basis bump of additional 5%. So 1231.26, you have a deemed disposition for purposes of recognizing the deferred gain. And so there's a little bit of a cash flow issue with this. And so if you're going to have to pay the tax, most likely April 17th of 2027. And you have to think about how you're going to fund the payment of that tax. And so if you reinvested the gain, you have to make sure that you're going to have the cash available to pay the tax that was deferred from the initial gain in 2027, okay? And so think about that. A lot of people have said, well, you know, whatever your basis was, you're gonna wanna keep that cash and hold on to it and make sure you have the ability to pay the tax. Step 7, we talked about deemed distribution. Again, protecting the cash on the sale attributable to the adjusted basis. In step 8, taxpayer holds the opportunity fund investment for 10 years and again permanently. Now, also they keep mentioning an election, and so I will be interested to see what that election is and how you make it. Talked about the tangible property, needs to be in the opportunity zone, substantially all for the holding period. This was all, again, talked about by John. Again, the 50% test, what that means, and getting information, getting the regulations to tell us what that means as far as the gross income from the active conduct of a trade or business. Again, certain businesses don't apply, don't qualify, the sins. So the Opportunity Zone Fund, again, the 30-month window that you have in order to deem to have substantial improvement. There have been several commentators that have written to the IRS to ask for effectively a startup period. And so they're hoping that we'll get a startup period of about 3 years or so in order to get the fund assets invested and then to have the 30-month window start. Again, we'll find out what that means. Another issue that we're kind of, we don't know about is with land. Let's say you go out and you buy a piece of raw land. What does it mean to substantially improve the land? Does the land basis count when you go to do your substantial improvement? And so we're waiting for guidance on that as well. Some of the things that we've also been kicking around is, does it make sense for a given investor, the incremental benefit, comparative after-tax returns. State law conformity is another thing. We don't know how different states, again, will view this type of thing. There's been states that have decoupled from certain aspects of the Tax Act that we have seen. For instance, Connecticut has decoupled from bonus depreciation in the most recent legislation, and so that's an area where we have to wait and see what the states will do. Mixed fund investments, where you have investors who roll over gains, but you also have investors that may not have gains that have been rolled over, but cash that go into the fund in order to fund a project. How does that work? That's another area where we'll be seeking guidance on. Again, how does the investor think about this versus the like-kind exchange? Again, we talked about the deferred gain and your initial investment being zero, the basis being zero in the Opportunity Zone Fund. And so what happens if you get allocations of losses each year? We start to run into the calculation of basis, partnership basis, and maybe you'll get losses allocated to you that you might not be able to use until a later date. What about cash flow distributions? Typically, distributions from a partnership do not carry a tax liability associated with it, but this could be an area where if you have zero basis in your partnership interest, that you may actually have to recognize gain on the distribution. And so it's another area we're waiting for guidance on. How does non-recourse borrowings and distribution of non-recourse borrowings work with respect to this? And if you do have a mixed fund, can the partnership make special allocations of tax losses to maybe the partners who have put in effectively after-tax dollars versus gain deferral dollars? And so, again, that's what we term a 704B allocation question, and it's something that, again, we'll be looking at to see how that works. Developers and sponsors think about the related party rules. Both John and Liddy talked about them briefly. For people who want the code sections, 179D2, and what that does is it refers you back to a code section 267B and 707, which typically have a 50% level before your related party. That 50% has been reduced to 20%. And so if you or a family member are 20% related to these entities, then a transaction is going to be disallowed. You're not going to be able to get the benefit of this if there's a sale. And yes. Yes, so the 20% would be 267 applies to corporations and individuals and the related party there. 707, which is also in that code section, relates to partnerships as well. So two partnerships being related or partners being related.
And I've got the mic back here. If anybody else has a question, just raise your hand and I'll come get you. Any other questions? Wow. Here we go.
If you refinance after 7 years to create some liquidity for your investors, does that screw up the capital gain after 10?
So you refinance after 7 years, and so that's the question: is you refinance and you distribute the proceeds, or typically a distribution of debt proceeds would be non-taxable. It should do what's called create minimum gain for you, which would allow the distribution, and we expect that that's going to be the guidance, that you should be able to do that.
Anybody else? Any questions? Nope. Okay. Your turn.
Could you talk a little bit about what happens in 2026 and 2027 with respect to the deemed recognition of gains? And what gains are you talking about? The gains on the investment?
No,
or the original gains?
The original, it was the original.
And do you get that money back since if you hold it 10 years? Because 2026 is not 10 years from now.
Right. So that's the rub, in essence, is that it's on the original gain. Okay, so you're going to pay the tax on the original deferred gain that you had. And that's why I said you really need to think about preserving the proceeds that you got from the return of basis on your original investment in order to pay the tax in 2027. Or if you have other funds in order to pay the tax. But you're right, there's a mismatch there, and ultimately you're going to have to pay the tax at the latest April 15th of 2027. Assuming that you paid estimated tax payments and you met the safe harbor requirements for 2026. Yeah. Okay, so.
Did you need this?
Sorry. What I was saying is that a number of people who are structuring funds, including ourselves, are trying to structure them so that if there's income generated from the underlying asset, we would accumulate that so that at the point when those capital gains are due in 2027, there would be sufficient funds for a tax distribution at that time.
And again,
Another question
and
back here.
that's a great point. That also, again, have to think about the distribution and whether that itself is creating a tax liability. You just don't know until you calculate the basis in the partnership interest, because there's going to be a differential between the outside basis in the partnership interest, the fund interest that you own, and the basis of the assets in the fund.
Persons or entities who are looking to utilize these funds, do we anticipate there being designated financial institutions who will oversee them?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
I said persons or entities who are looking to utilize funds. So I believe the first presenter said towns can have their own funds. Do we anticipate there being specific financial institutions that will be designated that somebody would go to, or how would you end up utilizing your funds?
Well, so I'll let Liddy.
My point in saying that towns can do this is to say that really literally anyone can create a fund. There is no authority designating funds. So we will have a fund. We are a financial institution. We think a lot of financial institutions will be creating funds for their customers. Mostly those are going to be high net worth individuals and some corporations, because those are the two groups that pay capital gains in this country today. So you can find these funds by Googling right now. You know my name, and you know that there'll be other groups. There'll be CDFI funds that are local. The CIC, I think there's some individuals from Community Investment Corporation here. Yeah, there you go. Want to raise your hand? I told them they should create a fund. I think you're thinking about it, right? Right. Yeah, there you go. Everyone raise your hand who wants to create a fund. Okay, there you go. Okay, we're going to have a lot of funds in this room. So I'm playing a game, but at the same time, the point is there'll be no central authority.
One of the other things I wanted to briefly mention is that the gain that's deferred currently and recognized at December 31st, 2026. There's a question as to whether it retains its character. And what I mean by that is, let's say, for instance, you have a short-term capital gain today of $1 million, and you put that short-term gain into an opportunity fund. Does that retain its character as short-term capital gain for purposes of when it is recognized at December 31st, 2026? And so we're waiting to get some guidance on that. I would fully expect that they would say that it's going to retain its character. I don't think the service is going to let you escape a short-term capital gain tax at ordinary income rates versus long-term rates just by deferral. But let's hope so, all right? Let's hope so.
Okay, Brian, we have another question right here.
Thank you. I wanted to follow up on the idea of the creation of new funds, and you see a lot of the press of Wall Street firms creating new opportunity zone funds. How does that work if you're talking about a commingled fund and the timing question with the requirement to, one, invest within 180 days of the gain and then the 30 months to build? Is everyone banking on what you referred to as the lead-in period?
Well, I think we're going to get some guidance on what kind of ramp-up period we may be able to get. And I can tell you that letters have been written to the service from different organizations that say that it should mirror other areas of the tax law that say you have 3 years to ramp up. Okay.
Thank you.
Anybody else? We good? Okay. Oh, okay, great.
And that's for any of our panelists, if there are any questions. I just had one, John. I'm going to direct it to you, I think. I mean, you talked about capital stack a couple of times, and I watched the Capital Region Development Authority come up with these just crazy lasagna, whatever we want to call them. Do you have a sense of how this tool will fit in with those that are out there? I've heard that, maybe the tool will be used for 5 to 30% of a project because the stack will make up for that. And Liddy, you might have something to say about this as well.
Well, Liddy raises the money, so she may have more to say, but I think, as I said earlier, our experience in these projects is sometimes it's the difficult part of the project is a developer has part of the equity, has actually some significant buy-in in communities like this from the government entities, but really is looking for the equity piece. And I think this is where we see a community like this and some of our other communities will be able to actually access the equity that's out there to come in for people who want the deferral or actually the forgiveness of the capital gains. So I think that everybody's looking at this, say this program is really complementary to the other programs. I think Liddy brought it out that we expect the program to be extremely flexible. It's not like some of these other programs where there's an allocation of amount that can be spent, or there's a state cap on something, and there's an allocation here, then an allocation there. So I think it is going to be a very, very powerful tool to get these projects done where there's equity that has been missing. But Liddy, do you want to add anything?
I will say that most of the real estate projects that we've seen that are in true, where there's a real public purpose being served, the equity stake is under 10%. Just to give you some order of magnitude, and most of the businesses obviously are completely different than that. So your equity is closer to 40 to 50 in a business if you're, typical buyout. One other thing that hasn't come up, and I guess I meant to mention it, is that unlike a lot of economic development programs where there is reporting about the impact of the economic development expense, there is no reporting on this. There's no job creation requirement. There's no educational requirement. There's no greater good requirement. That isn't to say we shouldn't do our best, But it is to say that there's nobody looking over your shoulder to see whether you're actually building, you know, a high-rise for ultra-wealthy individuals on the beautiful green in downtown Meriden. There's no stopping you.
I did see something in a comment letter to the IRS that I think came from the legislative sponsors, the congressional sponsors, that the lack of reporting was something that they were a little concerned about. Well, let's wait and see what the guidance is on that. Any other questions? Yeah, go ahead.
I'm trying to understand this. So you said before that 90%, you have to have 90%. Is that 90% of the equity? So if there's only 10% equity, you, the fund, or whatever it is, whoever it is that has to have 90% of that?
There are a lot of rules, and there are a lot of 90s and 10s and stuff, so it's confusing. What I think you're referring to is that, let's say you have $100 in an opportunity zone fund. $90 has to go into an opportunity zone. Yeah. Yeah.
So right, the fund has to invest in qualified property. And the question that we're waiting for guidance on is, how do you calculate the 90%? Is it adjusted tax basis? Is it fair market value? How do you calculate that? And once you start calculating it, I'm assuming you have to be consistent in how you calculate the 90%. And so, again, another area we should be getting guidance on.
Lawyers.
Yeah, but I also think, too, these programs are great, but you also, like a Meriden, you need to look at the economic viability of the project. You know, because you're competing. You saw the map that I think you presented. You got the whole country, and you're competing for capital. And I think that one of the things that I think sometimes gets lost in these projects, there's a lot of tax incentives. Again, the basis, right, you buy service business. It's not about current income. This is basically, I buy a building for $100, I improve it, $100. Again, I preserve my, you know, I buy it in Connecticut. Terrible story right now, right? Hopefully in 10 years, the story's a little better. I'm basically preserving, or what I'm protecting, or is the tax gain. I'm buying my base is going to be 200. Maybe in 10 years, it'll be $1 million, right? So the only thing I'm paying tax on is $800,000. But I guess my point is that I think what gets lost in a lot of these programs is the economic viability of the project. You know, it's great to think about tax credits and all these other things, but when you're competing for private capital, and I have an economic return, and if these projects don't pencil up because I can't get the market rent to work or things like that, these projects, you know, I think makes it very difficult.
I just want to say that's exactly right. Don't invest in anything that's a bad investment. That's the first step. Make sure it's a good investment, and as John said, make sure it's going to appreciate, because otherwise there's no point, because you won't have the capital gains to protect. So it's pointless. So you are smack dab on the money. Gotta invest in good things.
Like Meriden.
What?
Like Meriden.
But it also points out the fact why a lot of these projects become complicated and why you need to cobble together the public-private partnership that I keep talking about. I mean, we've done a lot of the projects that you referred to at the CRDA. We represent them in a lot of that creative financing. We're doing a lot of lofts projects and other type of projects, new market tax credits and historic tax credits in Bridgeport. And it's really all about taking this private investment we're talking about and leveraging it with the public investment, because without some public investment, I don't see these projects happening. And the good news, at least in many cases up until now, we've had a good public partner in getting some of these projects done.
I think we haven't gotten specific enough, and maybe this is where your question is coming from, about what the impact is for an investor. It's not going to turn a dog into a great investment. But If you're generating roughly a 7% internal rate of return, you might bump that up by, like everything goes great, you might get to 11, like a 30 to 40% improvement in that return. So going from a 7, which is a meh, to an 11, which is okay, maybe. That's the kind of thing we're talking about. This isn't going to solve all the problems. It just on the margin might make something that you wouldn't do, something that you might do.
Okay, I know we have a question in the back. Hang on. There you go.
It's more of an observation. First of all, I just want to introduce myself. I'm the Director of Economic Development for the City of Meriden, so welcome to downtown Meriden. Thank you all for coming. And I wanted to introduce Sean Moore and Roseanne Ford from the Mid-State Chamber and Tom Welsh from our Meriden Economic Development Board. So, and also members of our staff, and thank you. Just an observation though, so we are sitting in the middle of our opportunity zone. We do have 3 census tracts. I want to thank Rob Michelik from Department of Economic and Community Development that worked with us to designate our downtown as an opportunity zone. We have several projects that our investors are looking at this, and so I guess my observation is the sophisticated investors that are coming to downtown are already using the tax incentive tools, the low-income housing tax credits, historic tax credits, and other kind of sophisticated tools. So they're telling me that these types of tools will help them increase their internal rate of return by 3%, which is a lot. So we haven't had anyone enacting this yet, but it will be really interesting to see how they work through these tools. And I think it'll be even more interesting to see if, as this thing gets rolled out, is it attracting new equity and new investment into our downtown? Because right now, you know, the guys that use the low-income housing tax credits, they're ahead of the curve and they're already working these deals. In addition, I have a manufacturer that's also looking at this as a new investment opportunity. So we're not just seeing the housing developments, low-income housing tax credit investors, but also manufacturers, because we are a manufacturing city in our history, and so we do have sites that have opportunities for investment. So I just think it really is an exciting program, but the truth will be in how it works and how it's rolled out. And you know, we'll invite you back in a year from now to see how this all works and hopefully share some success stories. So thank you.
And one thing we haven't talked about is the fact that I think investors will be looking to see how the host community supports the opportunity. Is there infrastructure investment that's going to be made, or are there matching investments that the community can make? So that'll be one of the things that investors will be looking at. I'd like to introduce my friend Rob Michelik from the Department of Economic and Community Development. He's coordinating the state's response at this point, or it was, and just to have a couple of words from him about what the state is doing.
Thanks, Bob. We at the state are quite excited about this program. As Liddy noted earlier, I think it's really only limited by the $6.7 trillion or so of capital gains that are out there in the marketplace. However, it's incumbent upon states to position themselves as favorably as possible when it comes to the program because, as she also noted, capital is mobile and there are opportunity zones throughout the country. So we as a state, I think, first and foremost, see our role as essentially a matchmaker at this point in time. We want to create a repository of projects that investors can look at when they want to invest, and at the same time, a listing of funds that those with developers and the like that have these projects can look towards when they're looking for some additional funding. And so it's not a coincidence that when we solicited applications to communities for designation as opportunity zones, that we asked them to provide some information about the projects that they have already, that they see, whether they're shovel ready, whether they're in TOD zones, whether they are downtown and the like, so that we could begin to collect some data about these projects in anticipation of providing some sort of repository down the line. And at this stage, we've kind of culled through some of those projects in those census tracts to kind of narrow the list down a little bit, given the fact that some of those tracts were not designated as opportunity zones. And we're in the process now of beginning to go back out to communities to find some additional information about these tracts. So then, again, that we have a standardized list that funders can look at when they're looking at investable opportunities. And on the flip side of that, particularly after the IRS comes out with its rules, which should be any day now, I'm hearing, that we will create a list again of funds so that they may be like Liddy, who's talking about creating a Connecticut-specific fund, but also national funds, so people have additional opportunities to look at when they're seeking funding. Beyond that, we're looking at ways to better market this particular program. We've created a bit of a kitchen cabinet with folks like Liddy and Bob from CERC, with Patrick from Connecticut Main Street and others to advise us and help us figure out how to best promote this particular program. You know, this is a gathering that we hope to replicate, I think, throughout the state. And in addition, we've begun a bit to discuss what we might do to help further incentivize this particular program. It's tough for us in a position now where we're looking at a new gubernatorial administration to propose anything that would have a fiscal impact. And it'll be up to the next administration to make those determinations. But there may be things we can do that may not put additional burden on the budget, such as, you know, earmarking certain portions of programs to go to projects in opportunity zones. So stay tuned for that as things begin to roll out and as the new administration comes in. And I'll just leave you with one thing, and I'll say something that's in contrast to what Liddy said at the conclusion of her presentation. The least important thing you can do when you leave here is remember me, in part because I am actually leaving state service in about a week, but I do have here Maya Lohenberg from DECD, and some of you may know David Kouris, who's our Deputy Commissioner, and they'll be handling the program from here on out. But as a soon-to-be private citizen, I'm really excited about the program and hopeful that this will have a substantial impact on economic development here in the state of Connecticut. Thank you.
Your new employer is going to take full advantage of this program, I'm sure. So that completes the formal part of our program. We were happy to be able to be a sponsor of this event. We appreciate CCIM taking the lead on it, and we do hope to see many of you around as we get more information. We do plan to do probably 5 forums around the state of Connecticut in the next 6 weeks, assuming there's new information to spread. So we'll make sure that we keep you in the loop. And thanks CCM for their leadership on this, and thank the panel for the information that they provided. The bar is open. Thank you all.